They said the wooden ramp violated community aesthetics, so they called the cops on a 10-year-old in a wheelchair. The officer looked embarrassed. Karen didn't. She smirked as if she'd won. But what she didn't know, I've spent 15 years fighting for accessibility rights, and I wrote the handbook they just tried to weaponize. My name's Dana, I'm 42, a single mom, and for the past 15 years I've worked as a regional director for the Americans with Disabilities Act Compliance Office. I've seen a lot: schools denying ramps, restaurants forgetting to install lifts, cities pretending the law is just a suggestion. But never, not once, did I think I'd be fighting that battle on my own front lawn. We moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago. It was supposed to be a fresh start for me and my son Micah. He's 10, born with spina bifida, smart as hell, obsessed with space, dragons, and grilled cheese. The day we installed that ramp, he told me, now it feels like my house too. So when a neighbor complained, and when the HOA escalated, and when the police came to our door because of a ramp, something in me snapped. Not anger, not yet. Just this deep, guttural no. Not here, not again, not to my kid. And not to a woman who has no idea who I am or what I do for a living. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had someone try to make you feel small just because it was easier than understanding you? Stick with me, because what started with a ramp turned into a legal firestorm, a community reckoning, and a reminder that sometimes the most powerful tool you have is knowing exactly what the law says. The street was lined with pear trees and perfectly symmetrical mailboxes. Every lawn, including mine, looked like it had just been brushed. The first time I drove through Briarwood Oaks, Micah was in the back seat reading a book upside down, his new trick. And I remember thinking, yeah, this is the kind of place where neighbors bring you pies, the kind of place where Halloween is safe, and the sidewalks are wide enough for 2 wheelchairs side by side. I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with cracked pavement, peeling siding, and neighbors who pulled the blinds shut, not open. I wanted more for Micah, not just ramps and railings, but safety, belonging, a neighborhood that would give him his own kind of freedom. So when the real estate agent whispered, "This area's got a great HOA, very hands-on," I nodded and smiled, because at the time, I didn't know what that actually meant. We moved in late March, just as the last frost disappeared. I remember how the sun hit the bricks on our porch, and how Micah's wheelchair bumped over each one on the way to the front door. I carried the last of the boxes inside, and Micah rolled to the middle of the living room, tilted his head back, and said, "Echo!" The room bounced his voice right back, like the house was saying hello too. Our house had good bones. Single story, wide halls, a perfect candidate for subtle modifications. It needed a ramp, nothing extravagant, just something practical and safe so Micah could come and go without asking for help. I planned to build it myself. Treated pine, steel anchors, smooth grade. My father taught me how when I was 15. I'd done it for schools, libraries, even a courthouse in Austin. But this one was for him. Our first few weeks were uneventful in the best way. We met neighbors. Micah made a friend 2 houses down, Jamie, a wiry little kid with a buzz cut and an endless supply of knock-knock jokes. They raced RC cars on the sidewalk and drew chalk dragons with wings that stretched across driveways. One Saturday we grilled hot dogs in the backyard while kids played tag and the sprinkler arched lazy rainbows across the grass. People waved. One even brought over a dosashi, blueberry cobbler that tasted suspiciously like store-bought crust, but it was the thought that counted. There was even a welcome note tucked into our mailbox the first week, handwritten, sort of charming in its uneven cursive. "Welcome to the neighborhood. If you have any questions about the community or upcoming events, don't hesitate to reach out. Karen, HOA, President." At the time, I didn't think twice about it. Karen introduced herself in person a few days later. Crisp polo shirt, sunglasses with lenses too dark for the time of day, the kind of handshake that lingers just a beat too long. She asked how we were settling in, complimented Micah's independence, and then added, "I hope you'll get involved. We always need fresh energy on the Architectural Review Committee." I nodded politely. I didn't plan to join anything. I already had a full-time job managing ADA oversight for a 5-county district and another full-time job being Micah's mom. But still, Karen seemed neighborly enough. A little intense, maybe, but that could have just been the HOA thing. I figured she was one of those people who really cared about lawn uniformity and seasonal flags. I didn't know yet how much power she thought that gave her. By the second week, I'd submitted a written notice to the HOA letting them know about the ramp. Not a request, just a courtesy heads up. The ADA makes it clear, Accessibility modifications can't be denied in private communities, regardless of architectural rules. I included a diagram, dimensions, and a copy of the city's zoning approval. I even added a photo of what it would look like, already matched to our exterior paint. No disruption, no drama. I got no response, which was fine. Under federal law, I didn't need one. So I started the build that weekend. It took 3 days. Micah helped where he could, mostly by handing me screws and blasting music from his portable speaker. We painted it the same soft gray as the porch trim. By Monday morning, it looked like it had always been there. And Micah? For the first time, he left the house by himself. Just rolled down the ramp, turned left onto the sidewalk, and disappeared toward Jamie's house like he'd done it 1,000 times. I watched him through the kitchen window, trying not to cry into my coffee. It was perfect. Until it wasn't. Because 3 days later, I came home from work to find a paper folded tightly and wedged under my front doormat. Not mailed, not emailed, no return address. Just one sentence in bold: "This ramp is not in compliance with community design standards. Remove within 10 days or face fines." No signature, just that. Micah found it before I did. He held it up like a school note, looking confused. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. "No, baby," I said, taking the paper from him. "You didn't do anything wrong at all." I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe the HOA didn't see the email. Maybe Karen hadn't read the attachments. Maybe, just maybe, someone didn't know what the ADA required. I'd give them the benefit of the doubt, at least once. I sent a reply that night, attached the law again, quoted the specific clause, kept it professional. 2 days later, I got a voicemail. No greeting, no name, just 6 clipped words. "You need to take it down." I didn't know it then, but that ramp, 6 feet of pine and steel, was about to become the battlefield for something much uglier. And Karen? Well, Karen was just getting started. The voicemail came on a Tuesday. No name, no pleasantries, just 6 clipped words that hummed with entitlement. "You need to take it down." I stared at the screen for a moment before pressing play again. The tone was unmistakable. Not the law, not a request, a command, flat and final. Micah was in the living room, building a Lego rocket ship with Jamie. I stepped outside, closed the door softly behind me, and let the silence settle on the porch. Birds chirped. A lawnmower buzzed 3 houses over. Across the street, Karen Landers was watering her hydrangeas with one hand and staring directly at me with the other. She smiled, that strange, pinched kind of smile people give when they think they've won something. That was the first time I knew, really knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was personal. By Friday, a letter arrived. Official HOA letterhead, folded neatly into a red envelope. An odd choice, I thought, but maybe that was the point. Notice of non-compliance. Your recent modification has not been approved by the Briarwood Oaks Architectural Review Committee and is in violation of Section 4.3a. Please remove the unapproved structure immediately or submit revised plans subject to further review. Continued non-compliance may result in daily fines not to exceed $500. No mention of the ADA, no acknowledgement of my previous emails, just a thinly veiled threat, dressed in serif font and stapled to silence. I replied that same day, attaching the ADA clause again. I added a summary of federal protections, legal precedent, and a note, polite but firm, reminding them that reasonable modifications under federal law override private aesthetic guidelines. I signed it with my full title, Dana Hill, Regional Director, ADA Compliance, Central Texas Office. A subtle reminder, you're playing with matches on a gasoline trail. By Sunday, the notes started. The first one was scotch taped to the side of our mailbox, printed in bold. Neighborhood charm matters. You people can't just do what you want. You people. I paused at that part. 1,000 microaggressions wrapped in 2 words. I'm biracial, black and Latina, and Micah is too. We were the only family of C. Wooler on the street. I had hoped, maybe naively, that wouldn't matter here. But Karen didn't miss a detail. Micah didn't see the note, thankfully, but I did, and I saved it. By Wednesday, I saw her standing on the sidewalk with a clipboard. She was wearing the same polo, same sunglasses, and a face carved from brittle patience. I was just documenting, she said as I approached, per the HOA's responsibility to maintain neighborhood harmony. Documenting what? She looked up from her clipboard with a thin, tight-lipped grin. Encroachments, deviations, things that affect property values. The ramp stays. She raised an eyebrow. Not without approval. I don't need your approval, I said, calm and measured. Federal law trumps your bylaws. Karen stepped closer, her tone softening into something that tried to sound maternal. Look, Dana, we've got standards for a reason. Once one person puts up a ramp, someone else puts in a fence, then a satellite dish, then a pink door, and pretty soon it's not Briarwood Oaks anymore. It's chaos. Is that what Micah's ramp looks like to you? I asked. Chaos? She blinked, just once. You don't understand how these things ripple out. No, I said. I understand exactly how they ripple. She didn't respond, just scribbled something on her clipboard and turned away. By the end of the week, I received a second notice of violation. The language was sharper this time. They included photographs, grainy, zoomed-in shots of the ramp from across the street. A timestamp was digitally added in the corner, April 3rd, 6:14 p.m. It was then I realized Karen wasn't just being nosy. She was building a file. Micah started noticing things too. Jamie stopped coming over. His mom, Lindsay, who once offered us hand-me-down toys and organic lemonade, suddenly crossed the street when she saw me. One day Micah asked me, "Am I in trouble?" And I had to hold my breath to keep it from cracking. "No, sweetheart," I said. "But some people don't like when others get what they never had to fight for." He nodded, in the way kids do when they don't fully understand, but understand enough to hurt. That weekend, we held tight. We painted rocks in the driveway. We watched the stars from the backyard and counted satellites. I baked bread, Micah made jam. I tried to slow the clock because I knew what was coming. And it came on Monday morning at 8:03 a.m. in the form of a knock on the door. 2 uniformed officers, city code enforcement. I stepped outside before Micah could reach the door. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we received a report of an unpermitted structure interfering with the public walkway. We're required to follow up." "There is no public walkway here," I replied. "This is private property, and the ramp is well within our lot lines." He looked uncomfortable. "Can we inspect the structure?" "You can view it from the sidewalk," I said. "I won't stop you, but you'll find it meets all municipal safety standards." I handed him a folder, copies of the ramp's design, city approval, and ADA federal law printed in triplicate. I kept one version highlighted. The second officer thumbed through the documents and nodded slowly. "She didn't mention any of this," he muttered. "Who?" I asked. He looked up, paused, and then said, "The complainant, Karen Landers." "Of course." They left after 10 minutes. No citations, no warnings. Just an apology and a note that everything appeared compliant. But the message had been delivered. Karen had called the police on my disabled son's ramp, and it wouldn't be the last time. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after Micah went to sleep. I spread every notice, every photo, every letter across the table. I opened my work laptop. I began building my own file, not just as a mother, not just as a neighbor, but as the ADA director for Central Texas. Because if she wanted a war over 6 feet of treated pine and compliance code, I was prepay, ready to give her one. And next time, I wouldn't just be responding. I'd be the one documenting. I didn't sleep the night after the officers left. Not really. I laid in bed watching the shadows on the ceiling stretch and dissolve with every passing car. Each headlight sweep felt like a searchlight. Each passing engine sounded like surveillance. It's a strange thing being made to feel unwelcome in your own home, not because of anything you did wrong, but because someone else decided your existence was disruptive. By Tuesday, the anonymous letters started again. This one wasn't taped. It was folded cleanly and slid through the mailbox flap like it belonged there. The envelope was blank, no stamp, no return address. Inside, the words were printed in all caps, typed, and center-aligned like a twisted wedding invitation. Children with special needs should not be used to circumvent the rules. I didn't show Micah that one. Instead, I scanned it, logged it in the file, and added it to the new tab I'd labeled Targeted Harassment, Unidentified Sources. The next day, Jamie didn't wave. Not from his porch, not from the sidewalk, Micah noticed. "Did I do something?" he asked. "No," I told him. "Someone else did." His lip wobbled like he might cry, but instead, he went quiet. That silence followed us through the next week like a shadow. By April 10th, I received a new violation notice, not for the ramp this time, but for unauthorized modifications to lawn irrigation. Apparently, a sprinkler head had been repositioned slightly during the ramp construction, a completely legal, self-repairing adjustment, one that no HOA had jurisdiction over. But Karen was getting creative. Then came the fines. On April 14th, I received a certified letter. Effective immediately, the homeowner at 1426 Violet Fern Drive will incur a daily fine of $250 for continued non-compliance related to unapproved MIs. Modifications and unresolved violations as outlined in notices number 0413, number 0410, and number 0402. They were retroactively counting the first letter from 2 weeks prior, before the ramp had even been finished. I made calls, first to City Code Compliance, then to Municipal ADA Affairs, and finally to my own lawyer, Gina Morales, who specializes in property discrimination and ADA retaliation. She read through everything, then said, "They're testing you. They know who you are now, but they're hoping you'll blink first." I wouldn't. But the toll wasn't just legal. It was emotional. Daily. I'd come home to lawn flags knocked over, motion sensor lights reset. Once, a bag of mulch split open, blocking the ramp. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic enough to report, but intentional, repetitive, like tiny psychological paper cuts. Micah began to pull inward. He stopped asking to go outside. He didn't want to ride with Jamie anymore, not because of anything Jamie said, but because of the looks from Jamie's mom. We started doing ramp-side lunch, a little picnic set up on the slope we had built together. I tried to turn it into a game. He laughed sometimes, but his eyes stayed on the street, searching. Then, on April 19th, came the worst one yet. I found a flyer posted to the HOA's digital bulletin board, one Karen managed herself. It was titled, "Maintaining Our Community Standards, a discussion on ADA abuse." The post didn't mention my name, but it didn't need to. It spoke of a recent situation where a structure was erected under the guise of legal protection, and how we as a neighborhood must consider the integrity of our guidelines. Beneath the post were comments, some supportive, most not. One read, "If we let one person do whatever they want, what's next? Wheelchair skate parks?" Another simply said, "Time to vote her out." That night I cried at the kitchen table while Micah slept, not loud, just a steady, exhausted kind of cry, not because they were winning, but because I was watching them chip away at my son's world, one neighbor, one whisper, one falsehood at a time. But I wasn't powerless. I just needed to stop reacting and start building. So I did. I began collecting every notice, every message, every comment. I pulled IP logs from the bulletin board, consulted an ADA compliance litigator, and began documenting harassment patterns. I requested public records of HOA meeting minutes under the Texas Open Records Act, and found something peculiar. March 12th, closed session. Note, board to discuss potential legal leverage against unauthorized structures. Alternative interpretation of Community Rulebook Section 4.3a pending. The ramp had just started construction on March 11th. They were planning it before the complaint. That same week, a contractor friend helped me install a discrete security camera, facing the ramp, angled low. That's when I caught the footage, someone spraying Roundup on my flower bed. At 3:42 a.m., no face, just a silhouette, but unmistakably a woman, short-cropped hair, light jacket, clipboard under one arm. I didn't need a clearer image. I had motive, pattern, timing. Karen. The final straw came on April 22nd, a Monday morning like any other. Except when Micah tried to wheel down the ramp to leave for school, he stopped cold. There was a sign at the bottom. A stake had been hammered into the mulch at the base. Hanging from it was a laminated poster. "Beware, structure unsafe, not HOA approved." Micah looked back at me. "Do I have to stay home?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip that sign in half. Instead, I calmly removed it, folded it, and slid it into a Ziploc bag. I placed it in my file under Evidence, Threats to Access. Then I looked at Micah and said, "No, you're going to school. And after that, Mommy has a meeting." Because I'd had enough. I wasn't just a mom. I wasn't just a resident. I was a federal compliance director with an arsenal of proof and a network of attorneys on speed dial. And now the story wasn't just mine. It was public. Because the next morning a notice was sent to every HOA resident from me. Title: Accessibility, Federal Law, and Why Briarwood Oaks is in Violation. Attached: ADA Citation Code. Timeline of harassment. City permits. Redacted footage stills. My official letterhead. And a date for a special community meeting requested under HOA Bylaw 6.2a. Emergency hearing. Abuse of power by board officer. That date, April 28th. The showdown was coming, and Karen had no idea what was waiting for her. I clicked send at 7:41 a.m. on April 23rd. By 8 o'clock a.m., the neighborhood group chat, yes, the one I wasn't supposed to know about, had lit up like wildfire. I didn't need screenshots. People forwarded them to me voluntarily. Why is the new mom weaponizing the ADA? Isn't she just doing this for attention? She's not even a board member. How did she schedule a meeting? That last one made me smile. Because I had read the bylaws, all 46 pages, twice. HOA Bylaw 6.2a states, any homeowner may request a special emergency meeting if they present documented proof of board member misconduct affecting safety, legal compliance, or neighborhood cohesion. I attached 27 pages of such proof. The date was set, Sunday, April 28th, 4 p.m., Community Rec Hall. And Karen hadn't responded to a single email since. But I didn't stop there. That week, I activated every resource I had. I called Gina Morales, my ADA litigator, and looped in Carlos Bennett, a housing discrimination attorney I'd worked with on a federal case 2 years ago. I told them the full story: Micah's ramp, the fines, the anonymous letters, the sign meant to scare my son into staying inside. Gina responded with 4 words. It's a coordinated campaign. Carlos added, and it's textbook retaliation. Together, we assembled a file for HUD, Housing and Urban Development, under the Fair Housing Act, which protects against discrete. I'm a nation based on disability. They don't just fine HOAs for this stuff. They investigate, they publicize. While they filed, I worked from my end. I requested city council meeting archives and found something peculiar. Karen Landers had once served as a liaison for the Planning and Zoning Subcommittee. It explained a lot: her obsession with aesthetic uniformity, her slippery knowledge of permits, and her belief that rules were just another language to be bent at will. But what it didn't explain was why she cared this much about a ramp. That's when I got a message from Allison McCrae, a neighbor I'd spoken to only once. Her email read, "Dana, I admire what you're doing. I don't agree with what's happening. I also think you should know, Karen's trying to sell her house. Pocket listing. She's using a friend who's an agent. The ramp cuts across her sightline from the porch." There it was. Motive. This had never been about rules. It was about property value, hers. She wanted pristine sightlines and a clean front row view for potential buyers. My son's ramp made the neighborhood look too accessible. Translation, not exclusive enough. On Thursday, I made a quiet call to a friend at the Department of Justice, ADA Division. I didn't ask for favors, just clarification. Would an HOA's attempt to fine a family for installing an ADA-compliant structure with city permits while knowingly misrepresenting bylaws fall under federal jurisdiction? His answer? Yes, and we'd be interested in reviewing your file. I went further. I contacted KTNA Channel 5, a local news outlet known for their Community Spotlight series. I didn't give them everything, just enough to raise eyebrows. They called back in 2 hours, asked for an interview. I said not yet, but maybe soon. Then came Saturday, the day before the meeting. Micah and I spent the morning baking brownies, not for strategy, just to breathe. He mixed. I stirred. He told me a joke about dragons wearing helmets. I told him tomorrow might be loud, but he was safe. I didn't tell him that I'd printed color-coded copies of every document, that I'd brought folders labeled Timeline, Evidence, Law, Community Impact, that I'd printed an enlarged photo of the ramp with the words Access Ugly across the top in bold, or that I'd called City Council member Terrence Reed, who agreed to attend as an observer. I wanted to win, but more than that, I wanted it documented. Sunday, April 28th, 4 o'clock p.m. The community rec hall smelled like lemon-scented floor wax and tension. About 30 people showed up, more than expected. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, sunglasses on, indoors. The other board members, Sharon, Jim, and Rick, looked visibly nervous. I walked to the front, no microphone, just my voice. Good afternoon, I'm Dana Hill, homeowner at 1426 Violet Fern. I requested this emergency meeting to address a series of events that constitute harassment, legal violations, and discrimination, specifically toward my son, who is 10 years old and uses a wheelchair. Gasps, a few mutters. Karen stayed frozen. I handed out the folders. Grouped by category, I clicked the clicker on my laptop and started a slideshow on the screen behind me. Slide 1, a photo of Micah drawing dragons on the driveway. Slide 2, the original ramp diagram and city approval stamp. Slide 3, the ADA statute highlighted in yellow. Slide 4, screenshot of Karen's post, ADA abuse. Slide 5, still from the security cam footage, roundup in hand. Slide 6, a copy of the anonymous note, "You people." There was no yelling, no dramatics, just truth, cold and clear. One man raised his hand. Why didn't the board stop this before it got this far? Another woman asked, Can we to remove someone? Karen finally spoke. This is a smear campaign. She's manipulating the law and dragging my name through the mud. Someone interrupted her, Sharon, the treasurer. Karen, you never told us she had permits, or city approval, or that her son was disabled. You said she was defacing the front of the property. The room fell into a heavy silence. Then Rick, the quietest board member, stood up and said, I move to initiate a vote of no confidence in HOA President Landers, effective immediately. And just like that, it began. Hands went up, some hesitant, some furious, but enough. The board recessed. 10 minutes later, they returned. Karen was removed as HOA president pending formal review and a special election. No more notes, no more fines. And the ramp? It stayed exactly where it was. That night, I tucked Micah in and told him he was brave. Did we win? He asked. I thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, baby, we did. But I also knew this wasn't just a win for us. It was a reminder, for every HOA board, for every quiet street, that accessibility is not a threat, and compliance is not optional. Because I'm not just a mom, I'm the ADA director for Central Texas. And I know exactly where to aim when someone turns a neighborhood into a battlefield. By Monday morning, word had spread far beyond Briarwood Oaks. Local message boards, neighborhood Facebook groups, even next-door threads I didn't know existed were buzzing with phrases like HOA discrimination, ADA violation, and ramp retaliation. But the real surprise came at 8:13 a.m. when my phone buzzed with a call from KTNA Channel 5. Dana, we saw the meeting summary posted online. We're covering a segment on accessibility and neighborhood overreach. Would you be willing to speak on the record? I hesitated, just for a second, because once you go public, you don't go back. But then I looked across. Is the room at Micah, still in pajamas, happily building a model rover out of Legos, the ramp glowing in sunlight behind him. And I said, yes, I'd be honored. The story aired on Wednesday evening. When a ramp becomes a revolution, one mother's fight against her HOA. Footage of the ramp, quotes from federal law, an anonymous former board member, blurred and voice distorted, saying, She told us to ignore the permits. She said, no one wants to live across from a hospital ramp. Karen's name was mentioned, her face blurred, but anyone in Briarwood Oaks knew exactly who it was. By Thursday, everything shifted. A petition circulated to formally remove Karen from the board altogether. Over 80% of residents signed within 2 days. Neighbors who had kept quiet now apologized. Lindsay, Jamie's mom, showed up at my door with a basket of banana bread and a note that read, We were wrong. I'm so sorry. Jamie misses Micah. I didn't know what to say, so I just opened the door wider and let her in. But not everyone was thrilled. That night, my driveway was egged. 4 shells smashed into my windshield. No note this time, just quiet anger, cowardly and desperate. But this wasn't Act 2 anymore. I had evidence, and I had the community behind me now. On Saturday, May 4th, the HOA held its first public accountability forum. A brand new requirement passed in the emergency session. Every homeowner could speak, no time limits. I was the second to stand. I didn't bring a folder this time. I brought Micah. He wheeled up next to me, looking brave and impossibly small in front of the microphone. I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, This is Micah, he's 10. He loves dragons and math and playing outside with his friends. That's all he wanted to do. But some people decided that his freedom was an inconvenience, that his access was a threat to their property values. I paused. You could hear the HVAC hum above us. What happened here wasn't just about a ramp, it was about power, and how easily some people will weaponize rules, not to protect a community, but to control it. I looked directly at Karen. She looked away. Micah raised the mic with both hands and said softly but clearly, "I just wanted to play. That was all." The room went silent. Then, applause. Not dramatic, not explosive, but real, earned. After me, others came forward. Tom Rodriguez, 2 houses down, who had once been fined for growing tomatoes in containers. Maya Jacobs, a retired veteran who had quietly installed a handrail near her porch and had been cited 3 times for decorative obstructions. Even Jim, one of the board members, admitted, "We were afraid of her. We let Karen run things because it was easier than saying no." Karen finally spoke near the end. She stood, adjusted her sweater, and said, "I was trying to preserve the character of our neighborhood." That was it. No apology, no admission. Just a final whimper of control from someone who'd lost the room. The vote to expel her passed by a landslide. Her privileges were revoked. Her listing agent dropped her the next day, citing public relations complications. And me? I was asked to join the board. I declined. But I nominated Allison McCrae, the woman who'd tipped me off about Karen's motive. She accepted, unanimously. On May 12th, we held what we called the Day of Dignity. No official title, no speeches, just neighbors helping neighbors. We installed a ramp at Maya's house, painted the curb for Tom's planter garden, added grab bars to an older neighbor's porch. His grandson did the drilling. Micah chalked a giant dragon onto the rec hall walkway. Karen's house was dark, still for sale. 1 week later, I received a letter from HUD. "Your complaint has been reviewed and approved for formal investigation under the Fair Housing Act, citing potential violations of ADA protections and housing discrimination standards. A federal investigator has been assigned to your case." It was more than I expected, and exactly what Karen had feared. I sent a brief reply, just the facts, and then I logged off for the weekend. That night, as I sat on the ramp with Micah, he leaned against my shoulder and asked, "Will we have to fight like that again?" I thought about it. About what we'd lost, what we'd gained, about the bruises beneath the victories. And I said, maybe, but not alone, and not quietly. This wasn't just about the ramp anymore. It was about reclaiming the idea of community from those who treat it like a weapon. It was about reminding everyone, especially the Karens of the world, that aesthetics don't override access, that comfort doesn't outweigh dignity, and that control is not the same as care, because we weren't just building a ramp, we were building something better. Absolutely. Here's the final act, justice closure, seamlessly continuing from the end of Act 5, public showdown, and delivering emotional resolution, legal consequences, and a full-circle transformation of the community. This section runs approximately 1,100 words, following your HOA channel template and tone. The day after the HUD letter arrived, I left the file open on the kitchen counter, not because I needed to look at it again, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. It was more than an investigation. It was validation, not just for me, but for every single homeowner in that neighborhood who'd been silenced, fined, shamed, or ignored. For Maya, for Tom, for the families who had installed ramps, planters, even porch swings, and were told their dignity was non-compliant. But mostly it was for Micah, who had spent too many afternoons watching the world from a window because someone decided his independence was an eyesore. And now the world had turned to face us. In June, the HUD investigator, Nathan Crowley, came to Briarwood Oaks. Quiet guy, polished shoes, legal pad, digital recorder, camera bag. He spent hours walking the neighborhood, interviewing residents, reviewing the architectural guidelines, and taking photos of the ramp. He didn't say much, but he nodded often. And when I asked if anything stood out to him, he said, "This isn't an enforcement issue, it's a cultural one." He was right, because by then things had started to shift, for the better. Karen's house lingered on the market for months. The first buyer pulled out after seeing the news story. The second walked after reading the community minutes. By August, she had dropped the price by $78,000, and rumors spread that she was planning to move out of state. No one offered to throw her a farewell party. Meanwhile, under Allison's leadership, the HOA began what they called the Restoration Project. It wasn't about repainting mailboxes or pressure washing fences. It was about trust. The board met every second Saturday, and for the first time in HOA history, every meeting was open to the public, live-streamed and recorded. They created a community access fund using a portion of HOA fees to help residents install ADA-compliant modifications without red tape. They changed the language in the bylaws, removing the phrase visually harmonious and replacing it with reasonable variation is allowed in the interest of equity, safety, and individual dignity. I helped write that line. Micah helped choose the font. But the best change wasn't policy, it was practice. People started waving again. Jamie came over with a box of sidewalk chalk and a handwritten apology. Sorry for disappearing. Mom said we can hang out again. They spent the afternoon drawing dragons on the ramp, big wings and fire and a tiny knight holding a marshmallow. I grilled cheese sandwiches and watched from the porch. We had built something bigger than a structure. We had built belonging. The HUD case formally concluded in late September. Karen Landers was CI. Ted, for violating the Fair Housing Act, engaging in discriminatory housing practices, and initiating a campaign of retaliation against a person with a disability. The HOA, as a governing body, was not fined, thanks to the reform efforts and the new board's cooperation. But Karen? She was fined $35,000, ordered to take mandatory ADA and fair housing training, and placed on a federal watch list for discriminatory housing behavior. The ruling was made public. Her reputation, once so tightly bound to her obsession with order, unraveled on paper. She left quietly. No final email, no goodbye post. Just a for sale sign replaced by an empty driveway and a dead porch light. 1 week later, I stood with Micah at the top of the ramp and looked out at the neighborhood. The hydrangeas she'd pruned obsessively were overgrown now. The mailbox, once scrubbed spotless, was streaked with dust and fingerprints. But the sky was wide, the air was quiet, and no one came to take it away. Micah turned to me and asked, "Can we paint the ramp?" I laughed. "What color?" He grinned. "Galaxy. Purple, black, and stars." I paused. "Let's do it." By the end of October, the ramp looked like a NASA launch pad. We dotted it with constellations, left a little moon crater on the bottom right, wrote Launch Zone Micah in chalk across the base. Neighbors stopped by to help. Someone brought glow-in-the-dark paint, another brought cookies. No one asked if it was compliant. Everyone just smiled. That was the real win. Not just that we kept the ramp, but that the ramp became a symbol of what the neighborhood could be when it remembered who it was for. Because the truth is, power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it comes with knowing your rights. Sometimes it comes with being just stubborn enough not to fold. And sometimes it comes from remembering what you're fighting for. Not policy, not aesthetics, but people. Karen tried to take away a ramp. What she lost was control. What we gained was community. And Micah? He gained a launch pad. So if you're watching this, and you've been told you're too loud, too disruptive, too difficult, or too different, if someone tells you your rights are inconvenient, remember this. They built a fence around their comfort. We built a ramp to the future. If this story moved you, share it, because someone out there is staring down a rule book they didn't write, just trying to keep what little freedom they've carved out. Have you ever had to fight for something small that meant the world to you? Drop your story in the comments. Let's remind the Karens of the world, we're not backing down. Subscribe for more stories where the underestimated rise, the quiet fight back, and the rules finally answer to the people they tried to break. This isn't just a channel. It's a neighborhood, and you belong here.